welcome to episode 124 of the Adventures in Advising podcast. This is Matt Markin, and I'm joined by Mr. Ryan Scheckel from Texas Tech University. What's up, Ryan?
Hey, Matt. How's it going?
It's going well. So I'm going to briefly say something random, and that there are some changes coming to the Adventures in Advising podcast in May. So check out the podcast, social media throughout April for what that surprise is going to be. I honestly can't wait to share this info. Ryan, can you guess what that might be?
Well, one of the things I've always enjoyed about the podcast is that it doesn't sit still. And if I'm imagining what that news could be, it might be something about adding perspectives or voices or something like that. Maybe I guess everyone will just have to listen to find out what's going on.
I think that's a great way to put it. So with that said, let's get to today's episode. And Ryan, we've chatted about AI for quite a bit of time, and there's been various episodes over the last 4 months having to do with AI and generative AI. And we've quote unquote interviewed ChatGPT about higher ed and academic advising. But today we're exploring some other AI platforms and kind of testing them out to see what are they all about? What can it do? Is it beneficial? In our opinions, is it beneficial? How could others, such as advisors, administrators, even students, possibly use these different AI platforms? And the ones we're looking at today are Google's NotebookLM and Thea. And I should also just add that anything we say today about these AI platforms, it's our own opinions based off us testing out these platforms. We in no way endorse any product. So, Ryan, what makes you excited about today's episode?
Well, anyone who's listened to the podcast for a while knows that I still have that optimistic, hopeful viewpoint of like what these technology tools could do. And then I have that geeky little sci-fi voice in me that's like, and maybe one day we could have like an R2D2 or C-3PO style droid in our life. Every time I imagine an AI tool that would serve me best, it would be present, like physically present. It's so easy, out of sight, out of mind. It wouldn't require magic words. Like I think about smart speakers and how you have to remember to wake them or whatever with their proper word. It would also be proactive in my life, appropriately, not threateningly or in some other way a negative influence, but that it would say, hey, how's it going? Do you need help with this? And not like Clippy from way back whenever with Microsoft, but just sort of helpful. And so anyway, I'm a sucker for early adoption and playing with new shiny tools anyway. And I will always want to jump in and see what they're like and see if I can break them, see if I can figure out where their shortcomings are, and maybe if they're actually going to do something cool or not.
I mean, I guess that's always that mentality that you have of play around with it, the sandbox, and test it out and see how it benefits, maybe how it's not so beneficial, but how you can improve on it.
Yeah, and certainly before it goes behind some paywall or something.
Yeah, exactly. Where someone makes a lot of money off of it. But let's start with NotebookLM. So Google says that NotebookLM is the ultimate tool for understanding the information that matters most to you, and that it is built with Gemini 2.0. And that NotebookLM can be viewed as your personalized AI research assistant, considering you can download or upload, I should say, sources such as PDFs, for example, articles. You can put website links, YouTube video links, audio files, Google Docs, Google Slides. And what NotebookLM will do is summarize what you upload. And so, for example, if you upload 2 articles, NotebookLM will try to create these connections between the topics. They even provide citations, audio overviews, and among other things. And NotebookLM, the website says that they do not use your personal data to train NotebookLM. So they are saying that what you upload is not used in training. But Ryan, talk me through how you tested out NotebookLM.
Well, the first thing that really stood out to me, and you shared it with me, was that the deep dive podcast format of summary. I certainly have played around with tools that can summarize multiple documents to some effect or not. We were involved in a scholarly paper for the Pittsburgh Annual Conference in October 2024, where we had so many documents that we were trying to find themes and stuff from. And I think it was little PDF or small PDF. There's limitations on how many documents or whatever, which was one of the problems with our methodology is we couldn't find a tool that could handle the sample size, so to speak. So I'm familiar with them, with AI informed tools that will synthesize multiple sources or documents or whatever in a text format. But the idea of the deep dive podcast summary was something that was interesting to me. And so for folks who are watching the video version of this, with NotebookLM, which we're sharing on the screen right now, it allows you to create notebooks. And I don't think of organizing my investigations, if you want to call it that, my lines of inquiry this way, but it keeps things separate, which I find helpful as a user. The fact that it doesn't just upload something and get put into a list somewhere else, that visually they keep them separate. They also seem to try to create some sort of simple icon or emoji to do the visual summarization as well. And so the first thing that I did was to create a combined notebook with two articles that I happen to have on my phone. Yeah, I'm that kind of advising nerd, I guess. But Janet Schulenberg's article from The Mentor, What is Student Success and Who is Responsible, was the first source. Was a PDF that I had downloaded to read, probably on a plane or airport somewhere. And then I think I'd run across Cantwell's article from this sort of sociological perspective, student success as a social problem, evaluating the student success movement and its influence on higher education from a different academic lens. So I happen to have those two PDFs on my phone, and so I uploaded them to NotebookLM, and it does create a kind of, in the middle of the page, it does create a simple summary, maybe a paragraph or so, that you can do a lot with. You can mind map, you can add notes to, and you can use it in what you might think of as like a evaluative or study tool sense. But I very quickly went to the right of the screen and clicked on the audio overview deep dive podcast and generated that. For those who might be watching, since it was already generated, I can reload it. I haven't played around with it enough to know if it will create new ones. And I haven't done anything yet with the interactive mode, like while it's playing, because that kind of freaks me out. I feel like I'm interrupting people in a conversation to activate my microphone and try to influence it. So I think that's an interesting next step. But after the deep dive conversation is created and you listen to it, there's other things that you can do based off of that, including developing a study guide, sort of a briefing document or summary. This timeline feature is really interesting to the historian in me, to sort of see how it organizes the concepts in these two articles, let's say, in a historical sense. It also provides a list of like the people mentioned in the podcast recording, but also in the article, and then an FAQ document. So it generates a lot of tools off of whatever you upload to it. I think what we might spend some time discussing is the fascinating little deep dive podcast that it generates.
Yeah. Before we get to that, though, just to point out, I know when I was testing, I was using the free version. Were you using the free version as well?
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't paid for anything.
Okay. So apparently they do have a free version, so NotebookLM, and then I'm assuming a paid version, NotebookLM Plus. So like the free version, you essentially, like you've just talked about, uploaded these PDFs of these articles, but you can also do the website links, Google Docs, slides, all of that good stuff. Just like you mentioned, it has like the one-click summaries, FAQs, timelines, and then the generate those audio overviews. And so kind of like its own little podcast. But I guess the Plus version, you get all of that plus 5 times more audio overviews that you can do. And there's premium features as well that are available for Plus users, which I guess includes like you can share your chat only notebook, but also has advanced chat settings and other analytics. I don't know because I don't have the Plus version, but I just want to point that out. What we're using right now is the free version.
And I think for some new users, that might be overwhelming. Just the plus features. I'm always curious about it, but I also know that my curiosity, my tendency to click on everything, see what it can do or whatever, can diffuse any sense of momentum or productivity. Bouncing around from, oh, what about this and what does this do or whatever. I understand it's a new frontier, so to speak, in product development and computer learning and AI and that kind of stuff. But even this simplified free version presents so much more than I was expecting. Because initially what I heard was it'll make a podcast. And so, the fact that it does a lot more and is sort of flexible, and the notebooks are like, I could continue to add sources, and I don't know, I guess I might have to, if I add a new source, I don't know if it'd give me an opportunity to generate a new studio or new audio podcast. I don't know what that would be like for someone using the free version. Essentially, you might want to hold off in generating the audio overview if you still have sources you want to upload.
Yeah, it can definitely be overwhelming. I just know when my colleague told me about it and was talking about this, the podcast version of it, or this deep dive conversation, like that was the one thing I was like, I'm intrigued by this. Let me look this up. Let's upload and test it out. I was in awe, but it was also just weird as well for that deep dive mode. But I think there's a lot of benefits to this. The one thing, though, just to also point out is that at the bottom, if you're on the NotebookLM site, like the bottom of the screen will say NotebookLM can be inaccurate, so please double check its responses. And I think it's just a good reminder for anything that, you don't necessarily believe everything 100%. Always double check.
Right. Maybe one of these days an AI is going to generate the infamous Abraham Lincoln quote that you should never believe everything you see on the internet.
But I would say let's jump in. Let's listen to a clip or so about this deep dive mode.
Yeah, the first thing that struck me, because this was the first for my Google account, this was the first that I've ever generated, and the thing that stuck out to me immediately from the beginning was the audio overview or deep dive podcast's attempt to sound human, to sound real. And the first audio overview that it generated started with a laugh, which I'm going to play that now and see what it sounds like.
All right, welcome in everyone to the deep dive.
And I imagine that the creators of NotebookLM and the audio overview portion of it, they know that podcasts aren't always begun first thing. Like you and I, we had a conversation before we hit record. And I wonder what percentage of generated audio overview deep dive podcast files include some sort of lead in audio that implies a conversation was being had beforehand to make it more trustworthy, less produced, more human. That was an interesting idea to me. There are two voices, as far as I know. I didn't see any place to change the options. And you heard what I think of as the male voice. It seems like a strange world to be living in, presuming the genders of AI voices. But I think that's the intent of the makers, is to have a difference in the gendering and the quality of the voices. And so there's what I think of as a male voice and what I think of as a female voice. And in this particular audio overview or deep dive podcast for the student success documents I uploaded, the female voice early in the episode of the podcast, if you want to call it that, just said yeah a lot. And I felt like that was unusual, an unusual amount of yes. Yeah, frequent. As the male voice was introducing the topics of the articles and what they were going to be discussing in the podcast, there was a lot of affirmative voicings, but very quick, brief, and not a lot of contribution. But then as we move into the middle, let's say, of the recording of the audio file, there's a lot more give and take and back and forth and that sort of stuff.
I think we've all been in conversations where you might have that person that's constantly agreeing or acknowledging every few seconds what you're saying.
Right. Yeah, I'm mindful of the meta nature of this current space of our conversation, Matt. I tend I tend to fill space. I know that in my role, especially as an advisor. Not every student fills the space of the advising relationship, and so advisors drive conversations. I think it's naturally my personality. I also do a lot of presenting and recruiting, and dead air in any format is something that is hard to sit with for me. Even though I do really value the moments when you can be still and be quiet. When there's others around, it feels strange. And so I don't know if that's something that's common in other podcasts. I was thinking back to the podcast that I do listen to besides this one. And I'm like, I don't know that there's that relationship between the hosts. If one of them wouldn't eventually say, hey, do you hear yourself? But
But I remember when you sent me the clip of the beginning of that podcast, I guess, conversation, and with the person laughing, and my immediate response was like, I want to know what was so funny. I want to know what the recording was, if they were recording, what was like 30 seconds before that.
Yeah, there's part of me, there's this natural human element of our phones are listening to us, our devices are listening to us. I didn't say the words that I felt like a nerd, that I had these PDFs on my phone, but it was a thought process. And I'm like, maybe they're laughing at me for having these documents on my phone. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good thought to have. I don't know. Always be nice to AI.
That's right.
But do you want to play some more of one of the clips?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, as the podcast is generated, as the conversation continues, they do go through, especially if you're familiar with the sources you're uploading, you can see how they work through them. It feels like in a sort of top to bottom sense, like a reader would, which again, I'm curious about the design. Sometimes when I'm reading an article, I don't just go top to bottom. I go straight to the conclusions. I want to get a sense of like where it's coming from or whatever. I might read the abstract and the conclusions and then fill in the middle. I don't read everything in a linear sense. And I found that was interesting, at least in the design, in my very brief interactions with it. But there's a clip from the middle of the episode where they're talking about these ways of understanding student success. And in particular, the way that Janet Schulenberg represents the student success movement's effect on academic advising. Janet has written multiple histories of academic advising, another reason that I have that article on my phone. And there's a clip where the hosts are discussing the history of academic advising that I found interesting.
Okay, so to really see how we got here, Schulenberg takes us like way back with this history of academic advising, all the way back to Kenyon College in 1840.
1840.
Can you even imagine?
Yeah.
This is like...
It's a long time ago, yeah.
Rutherford B. Hayes, he was a student there.
Yeah.
He later became president.
Yeah.
But he wrote about this new thing called an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't academic advising like we think about it now, right?
No, not at all.
Schulenberg explains everyone took the same classes back then, right?
Yeah.
Like rhetoric, math, philosophy, Latin.
Classics.
The classics, right. Mm-hmm. And one professor might teach all those things.
Yeah.
And even be kind of like a parent figure to the students.
Right.
So this advisor thing started when things grew a little more complicated, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was 7 yeahs, but I found, again, the vocal quality, or I don't even know how that's one of the things about this where I understand that some people could feel like this is magical, because that seemed so human. I imagine somebody recording this. It's so easy to envision what was generated as a real person having a real conversation with somebody who keeps saying, yeah. But the way back, like that, like vocal fry, that's fascinating to me, that there's something that can generate that kind of audio that isn't a human voice. And then the pause, the dramatic pause for things got more complicated. I mean, it's it's just a fascinating tool. And I think I would have to imagine that's the idea behind generating these audio overviews. If it was just a robotic voice reading a summary or whatever, I don't think as a consumer of the product, I would pay for the premium version. So if the free version can make it sound that real, that's pretty interesting to me as far as like its design ethos, the philosophy behind the product they're developing.
Yeah, I mean, when you played that clip and other ones that we've kind of, these other notebooks that we've created, listened to this deep dive mode, like I was just thinking, like these articles sometimes lack emotion. They can be dry, they can be dense, they can be terminology heavy. There's a lot of jargon in there. You might get 5 minutes in reading an article and then be like, what did I just read? So this conversation mode, I think, is great. I mean, a lot of people like listening to podcasts. Hopefully, a lot like listening to this one. But it maybe, to me, like this helps to maybe break down some of those complexities and makes things a little bit more digestible. Hearing it from these two AI talking about whatever you upload. So I thought that was very fascinating as well.
Right. And you and I have talked about this in particular with our own work in academic advising, in, sort of our presentations at conferences and our own natural interests. Our brains tend to activate when it's kind of a mashup of something already known, in our case, a lot of times popular culture, and then something we love and are, value deeply, the work that we do in academic advising. That's where this entire relationship started, was the ways that our interest in the work that we do and the ways our work can be informed were activated by a unusual blend. And so in an academic space, in a learning space, to have a conversation that is more accessible, more natural, I can see the sort of purported power of these audio overviews, not just being a direct read in a straightforward voice of a summary generated by AI. I've thought about this before, especially watching folks go through our orientation process in the summers, especially early on, before sort of new leadership and new thinking about orientation as a recruiting event. It was a lot of like stand and deliver lectures. Our next guest is so-and-so, and they're going to tell you something directly. And after watching it for multiple times over multiple years, I started to daydream about it being run differently, perhaps more effectively, but certainly more entertainingly, like a late show, where you have a host, sure, and they do an opening monologue. Hopefully it'd be entertaining and engaging. But then they introduce a guest and they interview the guest, and you have breaks with music and things in between. And it's the sort of edutainment kind of approach that you see in online technology tools, where people are like, oh, I'm going to present it in the most interesting way possible to really engage the learner.
Now, it definitely makes it something different. Do you have another clip you want to play, or do you want to move on to the...
Well, we have one last from this notebook in particular. It's the way that it is structured. Now that I've done multiple audio overviews, there is a structure. There's some attempt at establishing banter and engagement around the topic, an introduction sort of thing, conversation in a typical linear format, and then a wrap up. And so for the student success notebook audio overview, I clipped out that wrap up so people could see how that goes.
You listening? Student success.
Yeah.
It's not just a number.
No.
Or a slogan.
It's much more than that. Yeah.
It's a big idea.
Yeah.
With a long history. Mm-hmm. And it's been shaped by who's going to college in America.
Yeah.
And how ideas about education have changed. Mm-hmm. And what's going on in society.
Right.
It's not just about what students do.
Yeah.
It's also about the system.
Yeah.
And the responsibility of the college.
Right. The whole landscape.
Yeah. So here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
Knowing all this history.
Yeah.
And knowing that student success is this social and systemic problem. What big changes do colleges need to make to make sure all students, no matter who they are, have a real chance to succeed?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Like, how do we balance the students' own choices with the college's responsibility?
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
That's a tough one. No easy answers.
No easy answers, but really important for the future of higher ed in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't really mention other sources today, but if you're interested in digging deeper, the names we've mentioned, like LUM.
And look, I know that ended before they get into the other names, but they tend to summarize, give you the big picture, and then pose a question or two, which again, as an educator, I imagine students being asked something that doesn't come from me. I imagine asking an entire class to take a shared reading, generate one of these audio overviews, see how they're different, see if they ask different questions at the end. I can't remember who I was talking to about AI tools. Maybe I was listening to someone talk about it. But what they did was it was a math professor. They had them pull up a shared AI tool available that is often used in math, upload a word problem from their discipline, and have the students in the class share all the ways that it gave different answers. Just in a way to provide a bit of a cautionary tale to suggest maybe we do need to double check its responses. So I imagine as an educator, encouraging our students to use this tool to see all the ways it generates differences, not just assuming, okay, well, these two imaginary people must be experts in this now because an AI reviewed the documents that I uploaded. But they all tend to be structured that way that I see. The introduction, then going through the article or the sources in a linear sense, and then creating that wrap up and summary with a question to chew on and that sort of stuff.
I think it's a good segue to go into like the study guide aspect of it, the timeline, FAQ. What were your general thoughts on those?
Yeah, after the audio overview, it kind of made the text-based resources that it generates a little less engaging. Part of me wanted to export the timeline, for example, out of this notebook and start a new notebook with that timeline just to see what sort of result would happen. Because sure, text-based summaries of articles or readings or whatever are a useful tool. They're not right now where I'm at, they're not the first thing I want to look at. Again, I did mention that the historian in me found the timeline interesting. And so to see how the timeline of main events in these two articles are presented, it was largely based on the Schulenberg article because that's the structure it takes. But even Cantwell's social problem approach to student success does have a historical analysis. And, I can't disagree with the way that it's been organized in a linear sense as a product. I understand when given these two sources, why it would generate a timeline that is purely linear. I did like the cast of characters and bios as one of the tools because that breaks that linear sense, presents things maybe thematically. But I have been making the argument that histories of academic advising shouldn't just be presented in straight lines, that there are themes that go across any sort of structural attempt to make eras or partition out our history, because that's not exactly how history operates. But for the most part, I think a student might really find some useful tools in the study guide or the FAQs, particularly when it comes to generating possible questions to study off of. But it is one of the places where this tool falls short of others, which I know we'll talk about here in a little bit. It doesn't directly quiz you, I'll put it that way. So it does require some effort, and maybe that's where I start to fall apart on it. as I'm like, look, I need it to be fed to me at this point. I don't know, but I did find it interesting after listening to the audio overview that I found the text-based generative product a little less interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation mode's to me, and I think a lot of people, is probably the highlight of NotebookLM. But yeah, I mean, you were mentioning a student, and I think this could be a great way to also, like, how else can we see students using it? Maybe even advisors and administrators. But yeah, from a student standpoint, I mean, being able to upload like your lecture notes or PowerPoint slides from class, the readings you have to do, I think to be able to create an instant study guide or almost instant within a few minutes,
sure,
it does give you something to kind of, especially if you go to class and then you're like maybe that night or the next day and you want to review your notes, this could be a great way to kind of sum up everything that you learned in class and organizes it in a certain way, which I think regardless of class, using it for one of your classes, a student could also probably upload like their syllabi or the due dates, and then have better time management, because then they can ask, when's my next exam in this class, or what assignments are due next week. But yeah, I mean, to summarize it, I think is like NotebookLM for students, at least it hopefully maybe can help students understand the material faster. Again, kind of get organized, have better time management. But if they're reading articles and they're like, I just want like a fresh voice to kind of talk to me about it, you have that deep conversation mode.
Yeah, and one of the things, since I've created 2 notebooks, I noticed that it does, perhaps it is personalizing things a little bit. I decided to create one around Mark Lowenstein's chapter from Academic Advising Approaches called Envisioning the Future of Academic Advising. And when I uploaded that and I created the audio overview, the way that audio file started was different in a way. And so I'm going to play a quick clip from there.
Hey, everyone, welcome back. You know, whether you're like actually in college right now, or maybe you're a parent, or even just someone who's interested in how like education's changing, one thing that's so important is academic advising.
Absolutely.
But, you know, it doesn't always get a ton of attention.
Yeah.
So today we're going to kind of like take a deep dive into what the future of academic advising could look like.
So it welcomed me back, and I thought that was interesting. Certainly, I've got 2 notebooks created so far. They're both about academic advising. So I don't know if they're drawing in the text, so to speak, the words selected for the audio overview, the importance of academic advising, but not getting the attention it deserves, or if that came out of Mark's chapter. And then there is a little bit of, I'll play a quick section where they talk about key takeaways from Mark's chapter.
Well, I think the key takeaway here is the shift in how we view the advisor's role.
Okay.
Because, you know, traditionally advising is often seen as like a support function, right?
Yeah, like helping with course registration or figuring out degree requirements or maybe pointing students towards career resources.
Exactly. It's like a service you use when you need something specific.
Okay.
But Lowenstein argues that advising should be so much more than that. He says it should be a fundamental learning experience for the student.
Interesting. So the advisor almost becomes like a teacher then.
That's exactly it. Like, they're not teaching a specific subject like history or biology, but they're helping the student make sense of their whole educational journey.
Okay. I can see that. Like how all their different courses and experiences connect together.
Exactly. It's like a professor who helps you connect different concepts within a course, right? But in this case, the advisor is helping the students see the connections between different courses. You know, encouraging them to think about different ways of knowing and understanding the world across disciplines.
Wow, that's a really cool way to think about it.
Right. And it's also about helping students figure out how all these different learning experiences contribute to their larger goals.
Which, you know, those goals can change over time too.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing process of reflection and refinement.
So it's not just about picking the right classes to graduate. It's more about understanding how those classes fit into a bigger picture.
Exactly. It's about helping students create a meaningful and coherent educational experience for themselves.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And so between those 2 clips in a second notebook, the different source, you can see a little bit of the differences in the way that the audio overviews are created. a little bit more personalized, perhaps, and in that sort of linear sense, because that's certainly that portion that was presented there in the takeaway about how advising should be a locus of learning, and advisors should be educators and not a service, and that kind of stuff. That's something I'm very familiar with, having spent as much time with the article or that chapter. But I did note, I was like, a couple times in the audio overview for the Lowenstein chapter, they alternated back and forth in pronunciations of the name, which I thought was interesting. But that's just an example of how NotebookLM as an AI-informed, driven tool isn't the same experience every time. And I think that can be something for users to consider, that maybe if you want the same result from every time you interact with the product, the fact that the audio overview is intended to humanize it a little way, you're going to get some variation, and not just in the suggested reliability of what's generated, but in the actual structure of what's generated. In the second audio overview, the female voice said a lot less, and sort of took a different role, which I thought was also interesting.
Yeah. So we talked about how maybe students can use it, but how do you see advisors or administrators possibly utilizing this?
Well, when you mentioned uploading a syllabus, one of the things I thought about was all of the things that as an administrator I've created: reports, ad copy in the sense of like promotional material, that kind of stuff. Any of the presentations that we do, we could generate transcripts from them. And then, have a kind of like FAQ that comes off of that or whatever. The NotebookLM gives any user a chance to group documents or sources, for lack of a better word, and then think about them differently. Because oftentimes we think about the education of a student's experience with our offices as episodic. But I was talking with a good friend recently about the idea that you could have so to speak, a transcript, a summary of an advising interaction with students across their whole advising career with you. And you could get a summary of that. And you could get someone else to comment on what they see in those interactions. And then that can inform your thinking about it. I can see how some people might be overwhelmed by that. But I also think that there's a lot of potential meta learning that advisors frequently don't have the time for, or when the time presents itself, we've moved on to other activities. And so there's a chance to think differently about the work that we do, to analyze our documents and programming differently. And then if we're engaging others with these tools, to have conversations about those. And I think that's where there might be some really productive conversation about the trends that we're seeing on the summaries generated by AI based on the work that we're doing.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I could see like maybe an administrator. I mean, I'm not an administrator, so this is just me assuming. But yeah, I mean, kind of taking a lot of these documents or materials, like let's say orientation materials, wellness resources, conduct policies, and maybe you're creating some quick FAQ that you can put on your website, or creating a handout of something. But I mean, even like let's say maybe taking like comparing proposals or annual reports, and then looking at like what are similarities, or did we achieve our outcomes or whatnot. But I think like from an advisor, just from like a professional development standpoint, it's like, okay, I want to read articles, but again, kind of going back to these can be lengthy articles, these can be very dry, and this gives a more human aspect to it, maybe makes things easier to understand. So I think this could just give great breakdown of concepts from an article that might be able to help advisors out if they're trying to increase their professional development in advising.
Yeah, my whole professional development journey includes the desire, understanding the benefit of, but then struggling with the reality of making that happen on a regular basis. The whole reason that I got involved in mashing up popular culture and academic advising scholarship was because I struggled with that. And so this tool could absolutely help anyone who is having a hard time connecting with the body of work, the literature around academic advising, and any of the work in higher education, to make it something more manageable.
I know we can probably talk more about NotebookLM for another couple hours, but let's jump into another one, and that's Thea, or might also be known as Thea Study. But it's an AI-powered study platform that enables students learning experiences on various topics. And from their website, Thea cites that they assist with an AI-supported study guide or summary that you feel more confident understanding the material when you head into your test or class discussion. And for educators, tutors, teachers, parents, coaches, Thea seamlessly allows you to place automated, personalized learning in the hands of your students that adapts to meet them where they are and provides valuable feedback when you are not there. So currently, Thea is in their beta phase. So age-wise, Thea is geared for students who are at least 13 years of age, and looks like it also supports over 80 languages at this point. Thea helps you learn, again, from what they say on their website, is Thea's ability to ask you questions, helps you gain understanding of your subject through the Socratic method of learning. And like I mentioned, they are currently in their beta phase. It looks like they have a free version that is good, I believe, until the end of June 2025. But Ryan, what was your experience playing around with this platform?
Well, I found some similarities. Again, for those who are watching the video version, the interface for users is a lot like NotebookLM in the sense that you can organize your learning around groups of sources. And so I created one in Thea just around Mark Lowenstein's chapter again, just to compare what comes out when you upload something. And the way that I created my account, maybe I might in a little bit have just a slight regret that I was honest, because I said I was an educator. And so the version of what I'm seeing is the educator version. It does give you a chance, which I can demo a little bit to see what the student side of it is. But I imagine that the demo might be a kind of a veneer that is not inaccurate per se, but it assumes some things about the user experience. We are at our institution currently a Blackboard institution, and every once in a while I'll remember, oh, what I'm seeing isn't the way the student sees it, and then I have the chance to go to the student preview, and so I think about products that create that, I don't know, bifurcation, maybe unnecessary user experience difference, but maybe it is very necessary. Maybe there's some real benefit that I'm missing right now. So I uploaded the Lowenstein chapter, and it created its own title, Vision for the Future of Academic Advising. I could edit the content so I can add more readings, that kind of stuff. You'll see that there's an optional review of the study guide that it creates, and then a chance to explore the student view, which I did. But the other options are to share with your students and to get insights into student learning. And that's where I was like, ooh, I can see, one, why the paywall is coming more quickly for this. Because if anyone wanted to use it as an educator, I am certain that the integration with your campus and your information systems and student information and directory stuff or whatever, there's a lot of questions to answer there. I think on the student side of it, uploading things and generating quizzes off of those things, I could see why that's a bit of a Wild West sort of situation. But the fact that educators could conceivably send some stuff to all of their students and then get insights into like the results of the quizzes and the questions that are generated, why there'd be interest in that as an educator and as an institution, but why there'd be concerns about privacy and security and all those sorts of things. But as somebody who has taught classes and had weekly quizzes, and I can see which questions they keep getting wrong, or And I'm like, well, is there something I'm doing? It's something that's not present in the instruction or in the design of the exam or the quiz or whatever. I see some possibility there to rethink as an educator the way content is presented in the course, the way assessment is done in the course. But the fact that Thea is its own product, I wonder if it's ripe for the purchasing for somebody like one of the big LMSs, one of the big learning management systems or something like that.
Regardless of what happens with that, I know like one of my students told me about this platform, and they're in an anatomy physiology class, and they had their first exam, didn't do too well. Somehow, I don't remember how they found out about Thea, but they utilized it for like the study guide, the flashcard aspect, the quizzes. And from their standpoint, it did help them prep them better for when they did their second exam. And they walked out of that classroom after doing that exam feeling more confident that they knew more of the answers than they did on the first exam.
Sure. And like I think that is it's interesting. The question I immediately have is, well, what was their test prep strategy before? Could it be articulated as a minimum of test prep compared to that minimum plus more? So is Thea the difference, or is just doing a little bit more the difference?
Or it could just be maybe how it's how much it's interactive compared to what they were doing prior, and maybe it was more visually appealing, and they felt, maybe they like this version better. But I guess that could be a nice segue to kind of see, like, from a student view, what they would actually be viewing, I guess.
Yeah. So as an educator account, I can click on the optional Explore Student View. And when I do, it leads me to their options. One of them is just, I'll say this interface, this page was not quite as helpful because it creates key terms at the bottom, above that sort of topics that it finds in the readings. And then you have the material or the sources, so to speak. And when I first looked at it, the only thing I saw was the Start Studying button. And when you click the Start Studying button, it gives you 4 options. There's the Smart Study, which is answering questions that are generated by the AI, the Study Guide, the flashcard and games under Memorize, and then a test, which will generate a potential test. I did the Smart Study just because I wanted to test it out to see what it looked like. And the first question I answered was appropriate and accurate for the reading, for the source that I uploaded for the Lowenstein chapter. I'll say that just a cursory review of the options, the multiple choice options presented, it wasn't particularly challenging. It wasn't hard. Again, I know this source material really well, but it was, I mean, the way that the wrong options were worded, which is something I struggle with as an educator. I'm great at generating the question to get them to think, and the right answer is obvious, but I make some really obvious wrong answers in my multiple choice. And so anyway, I was maybe projecting a little bit, but I answered the first question correctly. I was proud of myself. And it gave me further reading, which I was like, that's, again, as an educator, that is interesting. Because I didn't, it was the Future of Academic Advising publication from the Chronicle of Higher Education from a couple of years ago, which is behind a paywall. I thought was an interesting idea. But they said, oh, you're learning about this idea, and we find, I'm assuming on the internet, other reading available if you wanted to pursue this more. And that was an interesting component. I haven't been able to make it do it again. I've answered another 6 or 7 questions. I've answered wrong just to test that out or whatever. But
now, if you pick a wrong answer, does it give you an explanation of why it's wrong, or what would be the right answer?
So we'll use this question, but if I incorrectly select one and submit, it'll indicate in red what the right answer was, and then it does give you some sections from the readings to consider your answer from. Let's submit another potential wrong answer. Oh, I got it right on accident. Let's see, metacognitive learning focus objectives in advising focus on helping students reflect on their own thinking. I'm going to say that's false. And it gives me some bullet points from the chapter to consider. So it doesn't let me go back and change it, which is sometimes a testing or quizzing strategy or whatever, because it's capturing that and providing that perhaps this is a question that students are getting wrong or whatever for anyone who might be in the educator role.
Have you tried the flashcards?
No, so that would be under the memorize, I think. It says, welcome to Smart Flashcards. So, sorry, for those who aren't watching, the flashcard is metacognitive learning objectives. And you can click on it and it flips it over. It says goals that focus on awareness and regulation of one's own learning processes. And then you self-report. Yeah, I got that right. I would imagine, I've not used other flashcard apps. I've seen students using them. I tend to imagine the actual physical flashcard. And I think Lowenstein's chapter isn't vocabulary heavy. Mm-hmm. So it's probably hard for it to pick out. With
this, at least on this page, like it gives you the flashcard option, but there's also like the matching and guess the term option that maybe depending on, if, let's say it's a student and what they're studying, one of these three might be a better option for them.
Right. And it's like I said, there's certainly sources that are going to be better for these tools than others. I don't know where in the academic advisor world this particularly helps. Maybe if you have an onboard process where you have a lot of terminology, policy, and it is helpful for people to brush up. Perhaps you could create a study guide around the onboard process. That might be an interesting use in an academic advisor role.
Yeah. I would just think, like, from an advisor standpoint, meeting with students, this could potentially be something that maybe it's not necessarily that it's Thea, but if a student is wanting help with studying and, something more visual with flashcards or matching or, quiz taking, something like this might be something that they can inform students about. I'd be interested to see what the faculty have looked at this and what they think about it.
Yeah, I imagine when faculty are trying to ascertain the student experience of their course, there could be, in this sort of generative study tool, some really fascinating insights about what people, like how much are they? If it was all in one place, so much of that happens outside the classroom and outside of the faculty purview, that there is this sort of plausible deniability of like, well, that's up to them. And it's like, well, now you might be able to get reports on how much they're actually reviewing. And perhaps you could discuss the tool. But yeah, I think advisors knowing that these tools exist, especially when students discuss their struggles, one-on-one or group supplemental instruction or tutoring may not be the best fit for a student. Maybe something that's a little bit more asynchronous or on demand in a format could be a real help for a student too.
I just think overall, it's the topic of AI and generative AI and these various AI platforms is, to me, it's okay as an advisor to talk to your students about this stuff because it's still here. There's all these new ones that are out there or probably will be here soon. So it's kind of like if you have a personal opinion not liking AI, I mean, it's okay to still talk to your students about it and maybe the positives of it, what those benefits might be. But I think also if a student is going to use it, it's also whatever the policy is at your institution or within that specific department that class falls under. Look at the syllabi of your classes. If there's a blurb in it, remind your students to look at that. And even for them to even just chat with their professors about it as well.
Yeah, I think the first time I was surprised by a conversation about AI in higher education was when somebody was talking about the focus groups that they were doing with their students to find out how they are using it. Everything I remember up until that point was this sort of reactive, negative. What are we going to do about this? It was all problematic. And I think it's obvious in our approach here today that the dialogue, the learning, the testing, the critical and creative thinking is going to be a lot more helpful. I'm trying to avoid words that sound like AI words. It's going to be more beneficial for everybody if we do that kind of thinking than problematizing, stigmatizing, and thinking in a corrective sense.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm talking to AI Ryan right now.
That would be such a waste of resources.
Oh, no. Well, I think we reached time on this. I'm always wanting to learn more about it and, testing these out. So maybe we'll have future episodes looking at other AI platforms. But Ryan, always good to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt.